back to my channel. Let's get right into it. I'm using some watercolor paper, a pencil, and a kneaded eraser, and we're just going to start drawing our baby chick. So what we're going to start with is 2 circles, and the top circle is going to be the head, and then this bottom circle, we're just lightly sketching it out. That's going to be the body. So I'm sort of lightly sketching it so it looks like a circle. You could use a stencil or a fancy, what is that thing called, you know, the thing that makes circles. And then we're gonna do a little beak here, and it's just a little triangle, but the bottom part is a little bit hidden underneath there, so I'm just doing a little line, and then we're gonna create those eyes. So it's another little circle, and then I'm adding a slight little eyebrow there. Everything's little because it's a chick, but he looks angry here. But for some reason, these little chicks have angry eyes. And then I'm just gonna add a little bit of a tail. They don't have much of a tail, it's just this little tiny sort of circular triangle that pops out, and its little fuzzy butt. And then the top here can stay how it is, just round it out a bit to make it look a little more realistic. And then I'm sort of mapping out where I want my wing to be, so we'll put it right here. And it's just this tiny little underdeveloped wing. It's so tiny. But then we're gonna go into the legs. So they do have these little chunky legs, and they come out like this, and then this one's gonna be in the back, so we don't need to do that little circle there. But the legs are gonna come out just like this, so 2 parallel lines going down, and then they've got their little paws. So I'm just gonna draw in the back claw, foot, toe, and then the toes up front. There's going to be 3 up front, and they just look sort of like that. Same thing here. So we've got the 3 toes up front, and these are more facing us, and then you could see it to the side, so you're going to see that back toe go back like that. And even though they're little, they do have claws on them. So we're gonna just put in little claws there. And later when we go in with the paint, we're gonna bring those out a little bit more. But I'm just sort of erasing those lines, the overlapping lines, now that I've got my shape down. And now I'll go in and sort of tweak it. So this is definitely where the little wing's gonna be. And then just going to play with the shape of the head a little bit and define that beak. And I'm going back and forth in my head, like why does it look so angry? But it'll all look better in the end. These are the sketching stages. He has a little eyebrow on top, and then I'm just connecting that bottom piece to where I just drew that line. Just for my own reference, this is going to be the leg and the back, and then once we go in to start painting that, it'll help us out a little bit. So I'm just tweaking it here and there, and just sort of lightly going over that and playing with the shape, still figuring it out if this is exactly how I want to paint it. Going back into those toenails there, and I did erase the beak, and I made it a little bit shorter to make it look a little bit more like a baby instead of an adult, and I think this helped a lot. And then I'm just gonna puff out his chest a little bit more, make it a little bit more rounder, like a little chunky chick. Now I'm mixing up some yellows. I used some cadmium yellow and some yellow ochre, so that's going to be our base, and I'm just dropping in. This is wet into dry, and then I'm just sort of blending that out after I blot my brush. And we're doing our first layer here, and it's basically where those darker lines will be. I'm going in first, and I'm just slowly blending out that color, and it will eventually cover the entire body of the chick. So it's going to be a little bit darker under here, and his little leg. I'm just gonna keep going down, and you can always add another layer on top, so don't worry at this stage. You want to work lighter to darker. You don't want to go straight in too dark. So we're just putting that nice light yellow wash in until we're happy with it. Then I'm going to go in with a little bit more yellow ochre in there, or you can mix a little bit of orange with your yellow and create a little bit more depth where those creases will sort of be, like by the neck, by the wing, a little on the chest, where you'll naturally see some shadow. Go in to pull this leg a little bit further out. Now you can see how that tiny bit of shadow just kind of pulled that leg a little forward. So it's not just one big blob. Then I'm using a light mixture of orange, more orange in that yellow, and I'm putting that on the beak, but not like straight up bright orange. You can do that if you want a little bit more of a playful look. So mix yellow and a touch of orange and just blend that out, and it's okay if it bleeds into that yellow. And I'm doing the same thing on the legs. I'm just filling in those lines there. And later we'll go in and create some more details so it doesn't just look like a blob. I'll just fill that in until we are happy. And then for the eye, I'm going to go in with a tiny little detail brush, and I'm going to mix up some Paynes Gray and a bunch of water, and I'm just going to outline that eye. So this isn't the actual eyeball itself, it's the skin around it, so it's a light gray color. And then I'm going in with a deeper color, so I mixed up a touch of Paynes Gray with a touch of black, so it's not just pure black, and I'm doing that eye, the actual eyeball, and I'm leaving a tiny little white spot. And then I'm mixing in some yellow with a little tiny bit of that Paynes Gray to create some shadow by the eye. And the same thing here by the beak. I'm mixing orange with, you can use a violet or a little bit of Paynes Gray. Violet is the complementary of yellow, so I'll be using yellow and violet to create some shadow in here. So I'm going to go with a mixture of this orangey color. You don't have to use grays in this, you can just go in with some darker orange or some more yellow ochre if you don't want to mix up any sort of different mixtures. But I'm using just a touch of violet with my yellow, and that's going to create a nice gray using the complementary colors. And then we're just going to add these little tiny strokes, and it's just going to make the feathers pop out. And chicks are very fuzzy, so the feathers aren't very slicked down, so these are just little fuzzy details. And this is where I'm bringing in that gray sort of by the chest here and creating some shadow underneath and underneath that wing there. And as you can tell, I'm using a very skinny brush. You can use just the tip of a round brush because I am painting smaller. You don't have to paint this small, you can paint larger. I'm just playing it with my watercolor journal. And I'm just doing this wherever I feel like I want there to be a little bit more definition. On the legs and on the tail, a little underneath the butt there. And I'm just going back and forth with the different shades so we have some interest. See, I used a little bit more of that orangey mixture on top here because it's a little bit lighter on top. Going around that eyebrow, and I'm leaving, you can see above the eye, I'm leaving a little bit of a lighter space. I'm just going to keep going around. Can never get rid of hairs. Now for those toes, I'm going to use that same darker mixture, and I'm just going to draw in those claws there. So this is like an orange with a touch of Paynes Gray or a touch of violet, just to darken it up a bit. But you don't want it to be too muddy. You still want it to have a slight sort of orange hue to it. They're not black, so don't just go in with black unless you want to, but they're a little bit more, even if you have a light brown or an umber or burnt sienna, something like that would be nice on the little toes. You can see here I'm mixing a little bit of that orange shade with some violet that's on my palette. So like ultramarine violet, something that has a little bit of a cooler undertone works well. And I'm going in and I am putting in those tiny little lines on the legs of the chick. And I do apologize for the shake. No matter what I do, it always shakes. It doesn't look like it was shaking on camera, but I guess it was. But anyway, I'm just going to keep going in and putting those lines underneath those toes to sort of give them more definition. See how they have these little fat pads on the bottom of their toes? So I'm just going to sort of make that shape and then just go in and keep creating these little lines to give the legs some texture. And then I'm going underneath here again, and you see how I'm just sort of pulling out the bottoms to create that shape. And the back of the leg. And then I'm just going to create these little fuzzies. So I'm going around the chick and I'm making these little fuzzy lines. So just a little curved up, any way that you want. And you can see a little better here. So see how in the outline I'm just sort of pulling that out and sort of curving them and twirling the little hairs. So it looks a little bit more like a little fuzzy chick. And on the chest is super fuzzy. I'm going in there, and you can kind of still see a little bit of the pencil through. You can, it doesn't bother me, but if it bothers you, just make sure you really erase the outline of that pencil. And then I'm going in on my little head, doing the same thing until I'm happy. I'm just going to speed this up, but I'm just going to go in now that that layer is dry, and I'm going in and just creating some more lines in there. Deepening up the lines down here, adding a little bit more orange in there. And if this is too much, like, you don't need to do all the mixtures, just use some orange or sepia to create a little bit more of a shadow. Whatever works for you. There is no right or wrong. But to make this look a little bit more realistic, you do want to use something that's contrasting. You see how much that just adds? And then I'm going in and I'm adding a little bit of a darker round the eye there, and then on the little beak, his little nostril. So I don't go in straight with black. This is just a little touch of orange with a little Paynes Gray or sepia, and then you can leave it as it is, or if you want, you can put them on a little patch of grass, or in my case, I'm gonna paint in some green little blades of grass here, and I'm gonna go under and around, and we're sort of just gonna do a messy little meadow. So not super detailed, just laying in some green paint and sort of moving that paint around. So we got the wet into dry, and being careful around the little toes and just blending it out. And I'm just kind of dropping it down. It doesn't need to be super perfect. If you want, you can go in and plan a whole background out, paint the background in first, and then go over with your chick. But this is just a fun little journal entry that I got going on here. I just really felt like painting some Eastery vibes, some spring vibes. So I'm dropping in some more greens and some more blades of grass. And letting those colors blend together. I just don't want to overthink it too much. This area looks a little light. Just drop in some more green. I got a bunch of greens on my palette. I'm not really using a mixtures of green, gold, sap green, and then we've got some blue there that I'm just sort of mixing up to deepen up and change the value a bit. And the hues and the shades, all different. But I do want this to be a very springy color. I'm using what's left on the brush, and I'm just sort of bringing it down a bit. I'm just going to keep going until I'm happy with this. See, I'm just sort of lightly sketching in some blades of grass. It's like an idea of the grass. And then once this is dry, you can go in and create more detail. So I'm speeding this up a bit. And I'm just going to keep on going in until I'm happy with the first layer. Using a thinner brush to create some longer flowers that are sort of sticking up in the field around the cute little chick. And we're going to just paint in some daisies. So I'm using a yellow ochre as the stamen, and then a Paynes Gray mixture, and we're going to create some white flowers. So very watery mixture of Paynes Gray gives you that appearance of a white flower. You can also mix up sepia and Paynes Gray if you want a little bit more of a warmer tone, or you could do different colors, pinks, purples, blues. I sort of just picked up what was on my palette. So I think little baby pink or baby blue would look pretty with this. But yeah, little daisies or chamomiles or wild daisies, I guess. And if you lift up that color, it's going to give you that sort of outline of the petal. And I'm just going to roughly drop in some leaves in there. And then I want to do, I really want some blue or purple in here, so I'm just going to do a little bluebell here. Little tiny, not too detailed. As you can tell, these are pretty quick and loose. So I'm drawing the little stems, and then they have this sort of cap. It's sort of like arched over, and then I'll do another one on the side here, a little cap there, and maybe another one right here. And then I'm gonna mix up some blues and violets. So this is like a cerulean or cobalt blue mixed with some violet. And I'm just going to sort of paint out that bell shape, and then two little curves on the side. And you can mix in more purple if you want, more blue. I'm just kind of going for a pastel-y, Eastery vibe. I'm just painting in those sort of cylindrically bell shapes. And then at the bottom, you just have these little twirlies, little tiny dots that curve upward. And that one, you can leave it as a bud, or you can sort of just see swoop, swoop. Drop in some color there. And I'm not going to go too crazy. I'm just going to drop in a little bleed. Again, I'm working pretty small, so I don't want to mess up anything too much. Then I'm just going to add these little pieces of green that come out, and then I'm going to go over the feet a little bit so it looks more natural. And I'm just creating little tiny grass now that this is all dry. And I'm not going too super detailed. Just having fun with this. But yeah, this is a little bit darker gray blades of grass. And I'm using a smaller brush to do this. And I felt like adding a bit of a sky in there, so I'm doing the same thing I did with the grass. I'm sort of just dropping in some blue color, and I'm going to water that down. I'm going to load my brush with water and sort of blend out those lines that I dropped in. And again, it's not going to be perfect. I'm just sort of blending it out just so it's not just a white background. And again, you can go in and you can make this super detailed. You can do whatever you want. You can do a pretty sunset. Pink sky would be pretty. But I'm just blending that out and going around those. It would be easier to have put this down first for sure instead of going around, but we're just playing. I'll drop in some more blue. Create sort of like a gradient effect here. And blend that out. You could always go in later and add more detail as well. Just make sure this is around the chick. And I don't really mind that sort of messy look. Again, this is my exploratory journal, so I'm using some dry brushing here. So this brush is pretty dry, and I'm just going in and tapping that green and sort of creating some more texture with a dry brush. It's a fun time to play with techniques. See how nice that looks. And then I'm going in with a little bit of gouache and this sort of primary yellow ochre center on the daisies. And I'm going to put those over the dried grass. and I'm going to put some flowers in the grass as well. So this is gouache. I have white gouache, and I'm going to do the same thing with some petals here. I'm just going around the circles, and you can see I'm not doing like super detailed. I'm just sort of dropping them in. You can really take your time with this. But I'm kind of just going for a quick, fun, loose look. And I do love the texture of the gouache. So once this layer is dry, I will probably go over it again with another layer just to give a little bit more of a texture. I'm going to add some highlights to the petals up here that we already have because they're pretty gray. Then again, using that tiny, tiny brush, I am going in and adding the detail to the eye. Even though we already had it, this is just going to bring that out a lot more, and a little bit of a shine almost to the legs. And then I'm using that very detailed brush, and I'm going to just pull in some more highlights. Some little very light white gouache lines. You don't have to do this. I love to just add a little bit of gouache at the end for some texture, and it's just fun to play with. So yeah, see, I'm gonna go in again and see how much like brighter that second layer is. Super yummy. I love the texture and just like the vibrancy of it. I'm just gonna keep doing that until I'm happy with the amount I have, I guess. But I sort of just use the tip of that brush to fill it up and then just press down, and it creates that leaf shape. And these are pretty dry now, so I'm going to go in there and sort of blend out where there's white patches as that dried, and then I'm going to go back in and add a little bit more of those yellow dots just to fill in those spaces. And again, you can use any colors that you want with this. I kind of wish I did a little bit more like pinks, but I like this. It's very like classic. And I'm just putting in those final details, a little bit of shine on that beak. And around the eyes, some texture. And that's a wrap. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial and found it helpful. I'd love to see you give it a try. Don't forget to subscribe and drop a comment below letting me know what you'd like to see next. And if you stick around to the end, you're going to catch a little sneak peek. Yep, something fun is coming, so hit that subscribe button and I will see you in the next video.